Jake refused to join the HOA. They harassed him with fake violations and sent fake police to his house. Then Jake discovered something amazing: the HOA office was built on his land. He owned it the whole time. Jake sued them for $150,000, made them move their building, and dissolved the HOA forever. Sweet revenge. Before watching full story, comment below from where are you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. My name is Jake Martinez and I've lived on Maple Street for 15 years. When I first bought my little 2-bedroom house, this neighborhood was quiet and friendly. Kids played in the streets, neighbors waved at each other, and nobody cared if your grass was exactly 2 inches tall or if you painted your fence white instead of beige. Those were the good old days. Everything changed 3 years ago when the Willowbrook Homeowners Association was formed. At first they seemed harmless enough. They sent friendly letters asking if I wanted to join their community improvement initiative. They promised better neighborhood watch, organized events, and maintained common areas. I politely declined. I'm not a joiner, never have been. I keep my property clean, I'm respectful to my neighbors, and I mind my own business. That should be enough, right? Wrong. The HOA didn't like my answer. They started sending more letters, each one a little less friendly than the last. Then came the phone calls. Then the visits. "Mr. Martinez," said Karen Whitfield, the HOA president, standing on my doorstep with her perfectly styled blonde hair and her clipboard of doom. "We really need everyone in the neighborhood to participate. It's for the greater good." "I appreciate what you're trying to do," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "But I'm not interested. My property is well maintained and I don't cause any problems." Her smile became tight and fake. "Well, we'll see about that." I should have known right then that she wasn't going to give up. Over the next few months the HOA made my life miserable. They sent me violation notices for the most ridiculous things. Grass height exceeds community standards. It was 3 inches instead of 2. Unauthorized garden gnome display. I had one small gnome my grandmother gave me. Vehicle parked improperly in driveway. My truck was perfectly straight. Mailbox color does not comply with neighborhood guidelines. It was the same color for 10 years. Each violation came with threats of fines and legal action. The problem was I wasn't actually part of their HOA, so legally they couldn't do anything to me. This made them even angrier. The harassment escalated. They would drive by my house slowly, taking pictures. They complained to the city about imaginary code violations. They even convinced some of my neighbors to stop talking to me. "Jake, you should just join," said my neighbor Tom, looking uncomfortable. "It would make things easier for everyone." "Tom, I bought my house before this HOA existed," I explained. "I shouldn't have to join anything just to live peacefully in my own home." But I could see the pressure was getting to him too. The HOA was turning neighbor against neighbor, and it broke my heart. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was having my coffee on the front porch when 2 men in uniforms walked up to my door. They looked official enough: badges, utility belts, serious expressions. "Sir, we're here about multiple complaints regarding your property," said the taller one, who introduced himself as Officer Johnson. My heart started racing. "What kind of complaints?" "Numerous HOA violations, disturbing the peace, property maintenance issues," replied the shorter one, Officer Davis. "We need you to come with us to sort this out." Something felt wrong. Real cops don't usually come to your house for HOA disputes. And these guys seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact. "Can I see some identification?" I asked. Officer Johnson fumbled with his wallet, showing me a badge that looked off. The printing was slightly blurry, and it said Willowbrook Security instead of any real police department. "You're not real cops," I said, stepping back into my house. "Sir, please don't make this difficult," Officer Davis said, his hand moving toward what I thought was a weapon but turned out to be a walkie-talkie. I slammed the door and called 911. 20 minutes later, 2 actual police officers showed up. The fake cops were long gone, but the real officers took my statement seriously. "This is impersonating a police officer," said Officer Rodriguez. "That's a felony. Do you have any idea who might have sent them?" I had a pretty good idea. The next day, I hired a private investigator named Sarah Chin. She was sharp, experienced, and had a personal hatred of HOA abuse after dealing with her own nightmare in another state. "The fake cops were probably hired through some shady security company," she explained during our first meeting. "But we need to prove the connection to your HOA." Sarah got to work. Within a week, she had traced the fake officers to a company called Neighborhood Protection Services, which was owned by Karen Whitfield's brother-in-law. The same Karen Whitfield who was president of the Willowbrook HOA. But that wasn't the most interesting thing Sarah discovered. "Jake, you need to see this," she said, spreading out a collection of documents on my kitchen table. "I've been researching the property records for this whole area." She pointed to an old survey map from 1987. "Look at this original plot layout. Now look at this current survey." I studied the papers, but I'm not great with legal documents. "What am I looking at?" "Your property line," she said with a grin. "According to the original deed and this 1987 survey, your property extends 50 feet further east than anyone realized." My heart stopped. 50 feet? But that would mean the Willowbrook HOA office building is sitting on your land. I stared at the documents, hardly believing what I was seeing. The HOA had built their fancy office building, complete with meeting rooms, Karen's presidential office, and their hall of violation notices, right on top of property that legally belonged to me. "How is this possible?" I asked. "Property line disputes happen more often than you'd think," Sarah explained. "Over the years, people assume boundaries based on fences or landmarks. But those aren't always accurate. The legal boundary is what matters, and according to these official documents, you own that land." That night I barely slept. My mind was racing with possibilities. The HOA had made my life hell for months, sent fake cops to intimidate me and turn my neighbors against me. And all this time they were literally sitting on my property. I met with my lawyer, David Park, the next morning. David was a mild-mannered guy who specialized in property disputes, but when I showed him the documents, his eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. "This is incredible," he said, studying the surveys. "The HOA never did a proper title search before building. They assumed the land belonged to the neighborhood commons, but it's clearly part of your original deed." "So what are my options?" I asked. David smiled. "Well, legally you can demand they remove the building immediately. You can sue for trespassing, lost property value, and emotional distress. You could demand years of back rent for using your land. Or," I sensed there was more, "or we can have some fun with this." I liked the sound of that. Our plan was beautiful in its simplicity. Instead of immediately revealing what we knew, we would play along with the HOA's games while building our case. First, David filed a quiet title action to officially establish my property boundaries. This is a legal process that settles property line disputes, but it takes time and doesn't alert the other party immediately. Meanwhile, Sarah continued investigating the fake cops incident. She discovered that Karen had personally hired the security company and had given them specific instructions to scare the Martinez guy into compliance. We had everything we needed, but timing was crucial. The HOA was planning their biggest event of the year, the annual Community Excellence Awards, right in their office building. Karen had invited the mayor, city council members, and local news to celebrate their outstanding neighborhood improvement efforts. Perfect. While our legal cases moved forward, I decided to have some fun. I started complying with every ridiculous HOA demand, but in the most malicious way possible. When they demanded my grass be exactly 2 inches tall, I hired a professional landscaping crew to measure and trim every single blade to precisely 2 inches. It cost me $500, but the look on Karen's face when she couldn't find anything wrong was priceless. When they complained about my garden gnome, I replaced it with a small decorative rock. Then I researched their guidelines and discovered they said nothing about garden fairies, so I bought 12 of them. When they said my truck was parked improperly, I used a surveyor's level to ensure it was positioned with mathematical precision in the exact center of my driveway. For every petty rule they invented, I found a petty way to comply that somehow made them even angrier. "He's mocking us," I overheard Karen telling another board member. "We need to find a way to get rid of him." "What about another visit from those security officers?" suggested board member Brad Thompson. "No, that got too messy. We need something more official." I couldn't wait to see what they'd try next. 2 weeks before their big awards ceremony, Karen and the HOA board made their boldest move yet. They filed a nuisance lawsuit against me, claiming I was deliberately disrupting neighborhood harmony and refusing to participate in community improvement efforts. The lawsuit was ridiculous and would never hold up in court, but it wasn't meant to win. It was meant to intimidate me into giving up and moving away. They also began spreading rumors that I was some kind of troublemaker who was bringing down property values. Some of my neighbors started giving me dirty looks and someone even egged my house. But here's what they didn't know. Every action they took was being documented. Every harassment incident, every fake violation notice, every attempt to turn the neighborhood against me, Sarah had it all on record. We were building the most beautiful case of harassment, intimidation, and property theft I'd ever seen. 3 days before the awards ceremony, David's quiet title action was approved by the court. Officially and legally, I now had clear title to the land that included the HOA office building. That same day, Sarah finished her investigation into the fake cops. She had phone records, financial transactions, and even a recording of Karen discussing the plan with her brother-in-law. It was time. I had two options. I could file all my lawsuits immediately and shut down their ceremony, or I could wait and make the revelation public during their big celebration. The petty part of me wanted to wait. The practical part of me said to file immediately and be done with it. I chose petty. The day of the annual Community Excellence Awards was perfect. Sunny, warm, with a light breeze. The HOA had set up tables and chairs in the parking lot next to their office building. There were balloons, a buffet, and a small stage where Karen would give her presentation. About 50 people showed up, board members, neighborhood families, and the invited dignitaries. I watched from my front porch as they celebrated their outstanding community leadership. Karen took the stage wearing a bright blue dress and her biggest fake smile. Welcome everyone to our annual Community Excellence Awards. Thanks to the hard work of our board and the cooperation of our wonderful neighbors, Willowbrook has become the premier neighborhood in the city. The crowd applauded politely. This year we're especially proud of our enforcement efforts, Karen continued. We've maintained our high standards despite resistance from certain, problematic residents. Several people glanced in my direction. I waved cheerfully from my porch. But I'm happy to report that we're taking legal action to resolve these issues. Soon, Willowbrook will be the harmonious community we always envisioned. More applause. I checked my watch. David should be arriving any minute. Now, I'd like to invite Mayor Henderson to say a few words about the importance of homeowners associations in maintaining property values. That's when David's car pulled up. David walked calmly through the crowd, carrying a briefcase and wearing his best lawyer's smile. He approached the stage just as Mayor Henderson was finishing his remarks. "Excuse me," David said politely. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have some important legal documents that need to be served." Karen's face went pale. "This is a private event. You need to leave." "Actually," David said, pulling out the court-approved property survey, "this event is taking place on my client's private property. Jake Martinez is the legal owner of this land." The crowd murmured in confusion. Mayor Henderson stepped forward. "I'm sorry, what's going on here?" David smiled and gestured toward me. I stood up from my porch and walked over, carrying my own folder of documents. "Hi everyone," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet crowd. "I hate to crash your party, but there's something you all should know. The Willowbrook HOA office building, and the parking lot you're all standing in, is built on my property." The murmuring got louder. Karen grabbed the microphone. "That's ridiculous. This is neighborhood common area." I pulled out the original 1987 survey and held it up. According to this official document, filed with the county recorder's office, my property line extends 50 feet east of where everyone thought it was. Your entire office building is on my land. David stepped forward. "I have copies of the court decision for anyone who'd like to review it. Mr. Martinez is the legal owner of this property." Mayor Henderson looked confused. "How is this possible?" "It's possible because the HOA never did a proper title search before building," I explained. "They assumed this was common area, but it's actually part of my original deed from 15 years ago." Karen was turning red. "This is some kind of scam. He's lying." "Ma'am," said David calmly, "this isn't a scam. This is a legal court decision based on official property records. Your association has been trespassing on Mr. Martinez's land for 3 years. The crowd was buzzing with shock and confusion. Some people were looking at the documents David was handing out. Others were staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Karen finally exploded. "You think you're so smart? You think this changes anything? We'll fight this. We'll sue you for everything you have." "Actually, Karen," I said, pulling out another folder, "I'm the one who's going to be doing the suing." I handed copies of Sarah's investigation to Mayor Henderson and several other people. "This documents months of harassment, including the time you hired fake police officers to intimidate me." The mayor's eyebrows shot up. "Fake police officers?" "That's right," said David. "Ms. Whitfield hired a security company owned by her brother-in-law to impersonate police officers and threaten Mr. Martinez. That's a felony." Karen's face went from red to white. That's not. We were just trying to maintain neighborhood standards." "By breaking the law?" asked Mayor Henderson, clearly disturbed. I pulled out more documents. Here's a record of every frivolous violation notice, every harassment incident, and every attempt to intimidate me into joining an HOA that I was never legally required to join. The crowd was getting restless. Some people were starting to leave, clearly embarrassed to be associated with this mess. And here, I said, pulling out one final document, is my bill for 3 years of property rental. Since you've been using my land without permission, you owe me $3,600 per month in fair market rent. That comes to $129,600, plus interest. Karen nearly fainted. The ceremony fell apart after that. Mayor Henderson quietly left, muttering something about reviewing the city's relationship with neighborhood associations. The other dignitaries followed quickly. Most of the neighbors seemed stunned. A few came over to apologize for how I'd been treated. "Jake, I had no idea," said my neighbor Tom. "I'm sorry I pressured you to join. This whole thing has gotten way out of hand." "It's okay, Tom," I replied. "I don't blame the neighbors. You were all being manipulated too." Karen and the remaining board members huddled together, clearly panicking. I could hear fragments of their conversation. Lawyers? Emergency meeting? How did this happen? After most people left, Karen approached me with Brad Thompson and 2 other board members. "Look," she said, trying to regain some composure, "maybe we can work something out. We're all reasonable people here." "Are we?" I asked. "Because sending fake cops to my house doesn't seem very reasonable to me." "That was a misunderstanding," Brad said quickly. "We just wanted to resolve the situation peacefully. By having me arrested on fake charges?" I laughed. "That's your idea of peaceful?" David stepped forward. "My client is prepared to file multiple lawsuits: trespassing, harassment, intimidation, property theft, and emotional distress. The fake police incident alone could result in criminal charges." Karen looked desperate. "What do you want?" I pretended to think about it. "Well, first, you're going to move your office building off my property. Second, you're going to pay me the back rent I'm owed. Third, you're going to formally apologize to me and every neighbor you've harassed. And fourth, you're going to dissolve this HOA." "Dissolve the HOA?" Karen gasped. "We can't do that." "Sure you can," I said cheerfully. "Or I can sue you individually and collectively for enough money to buy this entire neighborhood." They knew I had them. Over the next week, Karen and the HOA board tried everything they could think of to avoid the consequences of their actions. They hired their own lawyer, who took one look at our evidence and advised them to settle immediately. They offered to pay me $50,000 to go away and let them keep the building. I countered with $200,000, plus they moved the building and dissolved the HOA. They offered $75,000 and a formal apology. I countered with $175,000, building removal, HOA dissolution, and Karen's resignation from any neighborhood leadership role. Back and forth we went, but I held all the cards. The evidence was overwhelming, and the longer they waited, the more expensive it would get. Finally, they agreed to my terms. $150,000 in damages, they would relocate their office building within 6 months, the HOA would be dissolved, and Karen would resign from all neighborhood activities. But I wasn't quite done yet. "There's one more condition," I told them during our final negotiation meeting. Karen looked exhausted. "What now?" "I want a public apology. Not just to me but to every neighbor you've harassed with your ridiculous rules. A full apology, published in the local newspaper and posted on every door in the neighborhood." "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "And," I continued, "I want a guarantee that no one associated with this HOA will ever try to form another homeowners association in this neighborhood." "You can't prevent people from organizing," protested Brad. "I can't," I agreed, "but the settlement agreement can include a clause that if anyone involved in the current HOA board tries to restart an HOA within 5 years, they'll owe me another $100,000. They didn't like it, but they agreed. 6 months later, I sat on my front porch with a cold beer, watching a crane carefully lift sections of the former HOA office building onto a flatbed truck. Karen had found a new location about 5 miles away, in a strip mall between a used car lot and a discount mattress store. It was a beautiful sight. The building removal process had been expensive and complicated. The HOA had to hire specialists to safely dismantle and relocate the structure without damaging the foundation or surrounding landscape. It cost them an additional $80,000 on top of our settlement. Karen supervised the move, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen her. She avoided eye contact with me, but I waved cheerfully every time she looked in my direction. "Having fun over there, Jake?" called my neighbor Tom from his yard. "Best entertainment I've had in years." I called back. Tom laughed and shook his head. I still can't believe they built that thing on your property without checking. Arrogance, I replied. They were so sure they were in the right, they never bothered to verify the facts. As the last piece of the building was loaded onto the truck, Karen walked over to my property line. She stood there for a moment looking like she wanted to say something. Yes, Karen? I asked politely. You've destroyed everything we worked for, she said quietly. No, I replied. I stopped you from destroying what we already had, a peaceful neighborhood where people could live their lives without being harassed by petty tyrants. She turned and walked away without another word. The public apology appeared in the Willowbrook Weekly the following Thursday. It was everything I had hoped for. The former board of the Willowbrook Homeowners Association would like to publicly apologize to Jake Martinez and all residents of Maple Street for our inappropriate and illegal actions over the past 3 years. We acknowledge that we engaged in harassment, intimidation, and violations of Mr. Martinez's property rights. We deeply regret sending fake police officers to Mr. Martinez's home and recognize that this action was both illegal and morally wrong. We also apologize to all neighbors who were pressured, fined, or harassed for minor violations that had no impact on neighborhood safety or property values. Our actions were motivated by a desire for control rather than genuine community improvement, and we take full responsibility for the division and conflict we created. We are dissolving the Willowbrook HOA effective immediately and will not attempt to form any similar organization in the future. We hope our neighbors can forgive our mistakes and work together to rebuild the sense of community we helped destroy. It was signed by Karen and all the board members. I had it framed and hung it in my kitchen. With the HOA office building gone, I suddenly had a large empty space on my property. After consulting with a landscape designer, I decided to create something that would benefit the whole neighborhood. I built a community garden. Not the kind of sterile, regulated garden that an HOA would create, but a real community space where anyone could plant whatever they wanted. I put in raised beds, fruit trees, a small greenhouse, and even a children's play area. The best part? No rules except be respectful and have fun. Kids started showing up first, excited to plant sunflowers and pumpkins. Then their parents came, curious about the tomato plants and herb gardens. Soon, neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in months were working side by side, sharing gardening tips and vegetables. This is what community looks like, I told Sarah Chin when she stopped by to see the garden. Not rules and violations and fear, but people choosing to work together. You should be proud, she said. You didn't just fight back against bullies, you created something better. The garden became the heart of our neighborhood. We had impromptu barbecues, children's birthday parties, and holiday gatherings. It brought people together in a way the HOA never could, because it was based on cooperation instead of control. A year later, I was interviewed by a local news station for a story about HOA abuses. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica Liu, was fascinated by the whole saga. What advice would you give to other people facing HOA harassment? She asked. First, know your rights, I replied. Don't assume the HOA has authority over you, especially if you bought your house before the HOA existed. Second, document everything. Every violation notice, every phone call, every interaction. Write it down and keep records. And third, don't be afraid to fight back. Bullies count on people being too intimidated or too tired to resist. But when you stand up to them, you often discover they're not as powerful as they pretend to be. Jessica smiled. Some people say you got lucky with the property line issue. Maybe, I admitted. But the property line just gave me leverage. The real victory was exposing their illegal behavior and getting them to stop harassing innocent neighbors. That didn't require luck. It just required persistence and the willingness to stand up for what's right. After the interview aired, I got dozens of emails and letters from people facing similar HOA problems. Some were looking for advice, others just wanted to share their stories. It made me realize how widespread this problem really is. 5 years later, Maple Street is a different place. The community garden is thriving, neighbors know each other's names, and kids play in the streets again. Property values have actually increased since the HOA dissolved, probably because buyers prefer a friendly neighborhood over a controlled one. Karen moved away about 2 years ago. I heard she tried to start another HOA in her new neighborhood, but the residents rejected the idea after someone told them about what happened here. I still get Christmas cards from some of the neighbors, thanking me for saving the neighborhood. That might be overstating things, but I'm proud of what we accomplished. The fake cops case eventually went to trial. Karen's brother-in-law was convicted of impersonating police officers and sentenced to 2 years probation and community service. Karen herself was found guilty of conspiracy and paid a substantial fine. The security company lost its license. As for me, I'm still living in my little house on Maple Street, still keeping my grass exactly 3 inches tall, just because I can, and still enjoying my one garden gnome. The difference is now nobody cares about any of that stuff. I used some of the settlement money to travel and some to improve my house. But mostly, I just enjoyed the peace and quiet of living in a neighborhood where people mind their own business and treat each other with respect. That's all I ever wanted in the first place. People sometimes ask me if I feel bad about destroying the HOA and costing the board members so much money. The answer is no, I don't feel bad at all. They chose to harass and intimidate their neighbors instead of trying to build genuine community. They chose to send fake cops to my house instead of accepting my polite refusal to join their organization. They chose to build their office on my land without checking if they had permission. I didn't destroy the HOA. They destroyed themselves through their own arrogance and illegal behavior. I just made sure they faced consequences for their actions. The real victory wasn't the money or the satisfaction of seeing Karen's shocked face when she realized her office was built on my property. The real victory was creating something better, a neighborhood where people choose to cooperate because they want to, not because they're forced to. And that's worth more than any settlement check. Every morning, I sit on my front porch with my coffee and watch kids walking to school, neighbors heading to work, and people tending the community garden. It's peaceful, it's friendly, and it's free. That's what home should feel like. And nobody, no HOA, no board of petty tyrants, no fake cops, can take that away from us ever again.